The skies above Elwynn Forest burned with unnatural light. Sentinel Gareth Stromwind stood atop the watchtower overlooking the road to Stormwind, his weathered hand gripping the pommel of his long sword as he watched the anomaly tear through reality itself. In 20 years of service to the Alliance, he had witnessed demons pour from the twisting nether, their sulfurous stench corrupting the air. He had watched undead legions march beneath cursed banners, their hollow eyes reflecting nothing but hunger. He had seen dragons rain fire upon the innocent, their ancient rage made manifest in columns of cleansing flame. But this was different, fundamentally, terrifyingly different. The rift that split the afternoon sky pulsed with energies that made his skin crawl, not the sickly green of fell corruption that had scarred Outland, not the death-cold purple of shadow magic that necromancers wielded, but something else entirely. Something that didn't belong to Azeroth, didn't originate from any source he could recognize or categorize. The tear in reality expanded like a wound being slowly opened, reality itself bending inward like fabric stretched too thin, and then with a silent explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the clouds, something emerged from the impossible space between worlds. By the light, his second, a young paladin named Theron, whispered beside him, his voice barely audible over the wind that had suddenly picked up. "What manner of sorcery is this? Should I sound the alarm?" Gareth had no answer, his experienced mind racing through decades of military training, trying to categorize this threat, to place it in some understood framework. But nothing fit. The figure that descended through the atmosphere was humanoid in shape. That much was clear, but it was suspended in the air without wings like a griffin, without the visible shimmer of levitation magic that mages used, without the holy radiance that allowed some paladins to hover briefly. The being simply floated there, defying gravity as though the fundamental laws of nature were optional suggestions rather than absolute rules. Even from this distance, perhaps half a mile away, the sentinel felt a primal warning scream through every instinct honed by decades of warfare against the Horde, against the Scourge, against the Burning Legion itself. This was a predator. This was death given form and purpose. This was something that existed so far beyond his capability to resist that his body's most basic survival mechanisms were screaming at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand here and observe. The figure's descent was deliberate, controlled, almost leisurely. As it drew closer, Gareth could make out more details through the watchtower's observation scope. The clothing was strange, utterly foreign to anything he had seen in his travels across Azeroth. White and blue garments that clung to a powerfully built frame. The material smooth and uniform in a way that suggested manufacturing techniques beyond Alliance or even gnomish capability. The cut was simple, almost utilitarian, lacking the ornate decoration that nobles favored or the practical additions that soldiers required. Dark hair framed a face that appeared human at first glance, complete with a distinctive mustache that would not have looked out of place on a Stormwind officer or a cool Tyron sea captain. But the eyes, even at this distance, held something that transcended humanity. Intelligence burned there, cold and calculating, analyzing everything with the precision of a gnomish engineer examining a new mechanism. Purpose radiated from the being like heat from a forge, absolute and unyielding. And beneath it all, a certainty that chilled Gareth more than any demon's roar or undead's hollow stare ever had. "Sound the alarm," Gareth commanded, his voice steadier than he felt, drawing on years of military discipline to maintain composure. "Get word to Stormwind immediately. Tell them we have an unknown entity entering Alliance territory. Tell Marshal Fordragon to mobilize the city guard. Tell them to prepare for the worst." Theron rushed to comply, his armor clanking as he descended the tower stairs 2 at a time. Gareth remained at his post, duty and curiosity warring with self-preservation instincts. He watched as the figure continued its descent, showing no concern for the Alliance patrol visible on the road below, no acknowledgement of the kingdom whose airspace he violated with such casual disregard. The being simply floated there, surveying the landscape with the detached interest of a cartographer examining a new territory, or perhaps more accurately, the calculating assessment of a general studying terrain before a battle. The entity touched down in a clearing perhaps half a mile from the tower, his boots making contact with Azerothian soil for the first time. The impact was gentle, producing no crater or shockwave, just a simple landing as though he had stepped off a low wall rather than descended from the stratosphere. For a moment, nothing happened. The figure simply stood there, motionless, a statue in human form. Then he knelt, reaching down to touch the grass with one hand, examining it with what appeared to be clinical curiosity. He plucked a single blade, held it up to the sunlight streaming through the forest canopy, studied it for several seconds, then let it fall from his fingers to drift back to earth. His gaze swept across the forest, taking in the ancient trees that had stood since before the First War, the distant mountains that marked the border with Duskwood, the watchtower where Gareth stood frozen in observation. The being's head turned with mechanical precision, and suddenly his eyes locked onto the sentinel's position. Even across the distance, even through the observation scope, Gareth felt the weight of that gaze, the measuring calculation behind it. The sensation was like being examined by something that saw not a person, not even a soldier, but a specimen, a test subject, prey. Then the figure smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth, no friendship, no humanity despite the human features. It was acknowledgement of prey that had been spotted and categorized. A predator showing teeth not in threat, but in certainty. The entity moved, and Gareth's world exploded into chaos. One moment the being stood in the clearing, clearly visible through the scope. The muscles relaxed in a stance that suggested absolute confidence. The next, he was simply gone, transformed into a blur of motion that defied comprehension, that exceeded the limits of what Gareth's eyes could track or his mind could process. The sonic boom of his passage arrived a heartbeat later, a physical wall of compressed air that shattered every window in the tower with explosive force, sending Gareth stumbling back from the observation post, his hands reflexively covering his ears against the thunderous assault. When his vision cleared, when the ringing in his ears subsided enough for thought to return, the figure hovered directly before him, having crossed half a mile in the span of a single breath, in less time than it took for a heart to beat twice. Up close, the resemblance to humanity was even more unsettling. The being appeared as a man in his prime, perhaps 40 years of age by human reckoning, with the bearing of nobility and the presence of absolute authority. The mustache was neatly trimmed, the hair styled with care, the posture that of someone accustomed to respect and obedience. But those eyes, those terrible eyes, held nothing human within them. No compassion, no doubt, no recognition of Gareth as anything more than an obstacle or a source of information. They were the eyes of something that had lived so long, seen so much, become so powerful that ordinary human concerns had ceased to register as meaningful. "I am Nolan Grayson of Viltrum," the entity spoke, his voice carrying perfectly despite the wind that whipped around the tower's top, despite the groaning of stressed wood and stone from the sonic boom's damage. The accent was strange, the pronunciation precise, but carrying inflections that suggested a native language fundamentally different from common. "You may call me Omni-Man. Tell me, what is this world called? What kingdoms exist here? How many of your species populate this realm?" Gareth's hand had moved to his sword without conscious thought, though he knew with absolute certainty that the weapon would be useless. 20 years of combat experience, countless battles against foes both mundane and supernatural, and never had he felt so completely outmatched. "You stand in the kingdom of Stormwind," he managed, forcing his voice to remain steady, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. This world is Azeroth, protected by the alliance of humans, dwarves, gnomes, and night elves. We have treaties with the horde of orcs, Tauren, and others. State your purpose here, stranger. Are you friend or foe? Omni-Man tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the question, by the very concept that his intentions might be subject to the Sentinel's approval or disapproval. Friend and foe are simplistic categorizations. I am neither and both. I am here to assess, to evaluate, to determine this world's potential and its place in the larger cosmos. Your cooperation would be appreciated but is not required. Now answer my question. How many kingdoms? How many cities? What is the total population of sentient beings on this world? I'll tell you nothing until you explain your presence here, Gareth replied, drawing his sword despite the futility of the gesture, steel rasping against leather as the blade cleared its sheath. The weapon felt like a child's toy in his hand, inadequate and almost embarrassing given what he faced. You've entered Alliance territory without permission, without announcement, without any diplomatic contact. By the laws of Stormwind, you're an invader until proven otherwise. Omni-Man's smile widened slightly, showing teeth that appeared perfectly human, but somehow suggested danger nonetheless. Invader, an interesting choice of words. Very well, Sentinel. Since you require proof of my capabilities before you'll cooperate, allow me to provide a demonstration. Consider this a lesson in the futility of resistance against powers you cannot comprehend. He moved his hand, a casual gesture like someone swatting away a bothersome insect, and the watchtower simply ceased to exist. Not exploded in a shower of stone and timber, not crumbled gradually under structural stress, but disintegrated. The ancient stones that had stood for decades, that had been reinforced with iron bands and blessed by priests of the light, that had weathered storms and sieges and the passage of years, simply came apart. They fragmented into pieces no larger than pebbles, transformed from a sturdy defensive structure into a rain of gravel and dust that began falling toward the ground below. Gareth found himself airborne, falling, the ground rushing up to meet him with terminal velocity. He had time for one prayer to the light, one desperate plea for salvation that he knew would not come, one final regret that he would never see his family again. But impact never came. Strong fingers wrapped around his arm, arresting his fall as easily as one might catch a dropped hook. And suddenly, he was being lowered gently to the road below, his boots touching solid ground with careful precision. Omni-Man set the Sentinel down gently on the road, his grip releasing without any visible effort, then brushed dust from the man's armor with almost paternal care. I did not come here to kill, Omni-Man said, his voice carrying a note that might have been regret or might simply have been clinical observation. Death serves no purpose in an initial assessment. I came to evaluate, to assess whether Azeroth and its inhabitants warrant conquest or partnership. Your response will help determine which path we take. He looked down at Gareth, and for a moment, something almost like respect flickered in those alien eyes. You drew your weapon knowing it would be useless. You maintained your composure despite overwhelming fear. You refused to provide information despite being completely at my mercy. That shows courage, Sentinel. Courage is valuable. It suggests your species has potential worth cultivating. Tell your leaders that Omni-Man has arrived. Tell them that the old order is ending, that Azeroth's isolation from the greater cosmos is finished. Tell them that resistance is both futile and counterproductive to their own survival, but that cooperation might earn them a place of honor in the new order. With that declaration, he was gone, accelerating into the sky so fast that Gareth barely registered the movement, leaving only a sonic boom that shattered windows in nearby houses and sent horses bolting in panic. The Sentinel stood alone on the road, surrounded by rubble that had been his tower. staring at the sky where the entity had vanished like mist under morning sun. Behind him, Theron emerged from what had been the tower's base, his face pale, his armor cracked from falling stone. "The alarm?" Gareth asked, his voice hoarse, his hands trembling as adrenaline slowly drained from his system. "Sent before the tower fell," Theron confirmed. "Stormwind will know within the hour. The mages will receive word even sooner through their communication spells." Gareth nodded slowly, his military training reasserting itself, pushing past the shock and fear to focus on necessary action. "Ready what men we have. Send runners to every settlement within a day's ride. Whatever this Omni-Man is, whatever he wants, we've just witnessed the beginning of something terrible. And I fear Stormwind is not prepared for what's coming." In the throne room of Stormwind Keep, King Anduin Wrynn stood before the war table, studying the reports that had flooded in over the past 2 hours with increasing alarm. The massive oak table bore a detailed map of the eastern kingdoms, with markers indicating troop positions, supply depots, and defensive installations. But those markers suddenly seemed inadequate, insufficient for dealing with a threat that could cross continents in heartbeats and destroy fortifications with casual gestures. Around him, the greatest minds and warriors of the Alliance had assembled with remarkable speed, summoned by urgent magical communications and the gravity of the situation. Lady Jaina Proudmoore, Lord Admiral of Kul Tiras, and one of the most powerful mages alive, stood to his right, her fingers trailing frost that formed delicate patterns on the table's surface as her unconscious magic responded to her agitation. Gen Greymane, King of Gilneas and elder statesman whose Worgen curse granted him strength beyond normal human limits, paced like the beast he could become, his bestial features set in a permanent scowl that spoke of barely controlled aggression. Prophet Velen of the Draenei stood motionless near the window, his ancient eyes troubled, his tendrils moving slowly as he contemplated possibilities his gift of prophecy revealed. Gelbin Mekatork, High Tinker of the Gnomes, had projected his holographic form from Ironforge, his small stature belying the brilliant mind that had revolutionized Alliance technology. Tyrande Whisperwind, High Priestess of Elwynn and leader of the Night Elves, her silver eyes distant as she communed with her goddess, seeking guidance that had not yet come. An entity appearing from nowhere, Anduin said, his youthful voice carrying authority that belied his years. Leadership thrust upon him when his father Varian had died, saving Azeroth from the Legion. Capable of sustained flight without any visible magical assistance, possessing physical strength sufficient to destroy a fortified watchtower with a single gesture, and moving at speeds our most advanced observation equipment could barely perceive. The Sentinel's report describes the entity as humanoid, apparently male, claiming to represent something called the Viltrum Empire. What are we dealing with? Not a demon, Jaina said immediately, frost spreading across the table where her hand rested, her voice carrying absolute certainty, born from decades of studying field corruption and combating the Burning Legion. I've personally examined the eyewitness accounts, analyzed the magical residue at the manifestation site, consulted with every expert in the Kirin Tor. There's no epheal corruption, no demonic signature, no trace of the twisting nether's taint. Whatever this Omni-Man is, whatever realm or dimension he originates from, he's not connected to the Legion. Could it be old god corruption? Gen suggested, his voice a low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest, his Worgen nature surfacing in his agitation. We've seen what whispers from the depths can do to the mind, how they can twist perception in reality. Perhaps this entity is a puppet, a tool of the Void Lord seeking to infiltrate Azeroth through methods we haven't encountered before. Velen shook his head slowly, his ancient wisdom carried in every measured movement, his tendrils swaying with subtle grace. The light shows me no shadow of the void in this being, no corruption of the type we have faced from N'Zoth or Yogg-Saron. This Omni-Man is material, physical, bound by laws of a different reality perhaps, but not touched by the void's maddening influence. He registers as alive in ways that demons and undead do not, as real in ways that illusions and projections cannot match. Then what is he? Anduin demanded, frustration creeping into his carefully controlled tone, his hand moving unconsciously to rest on Charlemagne, the legendary sword reforged from his father's blade. Where did he come from? What does he want with Azeroth? And most importantly, how do we stop him if he proves hostile? Conquest, Tyrande said softly, her voice carrying the weight of millennia, having witnessed the rise and fall of empires across 10,000 years. He spoke of elevating Azeroth, of assessing whether our world warrants conquest or partnership. Such rhetoric always masks the truth of domination dressed in prettier words. I have lived through the War of the Ancients when Sargeras himself sought to enter our world. I witnessed the sundering that nearly destroyed Azeroth. I fought through the Burning Crusade and every threat since. This Omni-Man speaks like every conqueror I have ever known, using different words perhaps, carrying alternative justifications. But the intent is always the same. Subjugation of the free by those who believe might grant them the right to rule. Mechanitork adjusted his mechanical eyepiece, his image flickering slightly as he manipulated controls visible only to him, studying technical data that scrolled across his vision. If the eyewitness reports are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt Sentinel Stromwind's military experience or observational skills, this entity violates several fundamental principles of Azerothian physics that we consider immutable. Flight without magical assistance suggests either technology far beyond our current understanding, perhaps utilizing gravitational manipulation or spatial distortion, or biological adaptation that we've never encountered in any species across Azeroth, Outland, Draenor, or any realm we've explored. The speed alone presents paradoxes, moving at velocities that should generate heat sufficient to ignite the atmosphere, yet he shows no signs of burning. The force required to pulverize adamantium-reinforced stone should have destroyed his body at the cellular level, yet he remains unharmed. It's impossible, which means our understanding of what's possible requires fundamental revision. So he's impossible, Gen muttered, his clawed fingers drumming against the table's edge with barely controlled impatience. That doesn't help us. We need strategies, not philosophical discussions about the limits of reality. No, Mechanitork corrected, his holographic form leaning forward with emphasis, circuits glowing brighter as his excitement grew. He's improbable, which is fundamentally different from impossible. Improbable means there are rules governing his abilities, principles and mechanisms we simply don't understand yet. And anything with rules can be studied, analyzed, and eventually countered, given sufficient time and resources. The question is whether we have time to conduct that research before he decides Azeroth is worth conquering rather than partnering with. Time we may not have, Jaina interjected, her ice-blue eyes reflecting strategic thinking honed through warfare. Your Majesty, we need to assume this entity will continue whatever mission brought him here. If his words to Sentinel Stromwind are genuine, if he meant what he said about assessing Azeroth, he'll target population centers next. Major cities where he can observe our civilization at its height, or perhaps military installations to gauge our defensive capabilities. We need to evacuate civilians from potential targets and mobilize our forces to defensive positions. Anduin nodded, his hand tightening on Charlemagne, feeling the weight of his father's legacy in the reforged blade. Agreed. Issue evacuation protocols for Goldshire, Lakeshire, and Darkshire as immediate priorities. They're close to the manifestation site. Marshal Fordragon, coordinate with the 7th Legion to establish defensive perimeters around Stormwind. But we also need information beyond what military force can provide. Velen, can the Draenei's dimensional technology track where this rift originated? If we can identify his home dimension or reality, we might find weaknesses to exploit or at least understand what we're facing. Perhaps, the prophet mused, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested deep thought, his connection to the light illuminating possibilities. If we can study the residual energies at the manifestation site in Elwynn, trace the dimensional signature back to its origin point. But Your Majesty, I must counsel caution born from 25,000 years of experience. We face an unknown from beyond our reality, from a dimension or universe we've never encountered. Confrontation may be inevitable, but we should exhaust all alternatives first. Diplomacy, understanding, attempts at peaceful coexistence before we commit to warfare against an enemy whose full capabilities remain unknown. Diplomacy with something that destroyed a tower as a demonstration of power? Gin snarled, his eyes flashing yellow as his Worgen nature pushed closer to the surface. No, we've been down this road before with the Burning Legion. With Deathwing, with Garrosh Hellscream and every other threat that's come to our shores, promising peace while sharpening their blades behind their backs. Every time we've tried diplomacy with clear threats, we've paid in blood and ashes. We should strike first, strike hard, and strike with everything we have while he's still alone and unsupported. And if our everything is insufficient? Tyrande countered, her voice sharp with the authority of military command earned through millennia of warfare. The Night Elves have stood for 10,000 years because we learned when to fight and when to seek understanding, when to draw steel and when to extend hands in peace. This being came alone, without army or fleet, without the support structure that normally accompanies invasion forces. That suggests either supreme arrogance or supreme confidence backed by genuine power that makes armies unnecessary. We should determine which before committing to open warfare. The debate continued, voices rising as the assembled leaders of the Alliance argued strategy and philosophy, each perspective shaped by their race's history and their personal experiences with threats to Azeroth. Anduin listened to each viewpoint, weighing options with the measured deliberation his father had taught him through years of preparation for kingship. Varian Wrynn had been a warrior king, strong and decisive, leading from the front with blade in hand. But he had also taught his son that true strength lay not in the speed with which one rushed to battle, but in the wisdom to choose the right battles and the right approaches. A guard burst into the throne room, his face flushed with exertion, his armor showing signs of hasty donning. Your Majesty, report from Goldshear. The entity has been sighted again. He's moving through the town, speaking with civilians, asking questions about our population and our civilization. No violence has been reported yet, but the populace is terrified. Many are fleeing to Stormwind, clogging the roads. Anduin's decision crystallized in an instant, clarity cutting through the debates and uncertainties. I'm going there personally. Jaina, Velen, accompany me. We'll attempt direct communication, establish whether diplomacy is possible. Again, mobilize the 7th Legion, but keep them at a distance, outside the town, but close enough to respond. If this turns hostile, I want reinforcements ready to extract us and protect civilians. Mekatorke, begin immediate analysis of the rift site in Elwynn. Gather every sensor reading, every magical trace, every piece of data you can extract. Tyrande, reach out to the Horde. They need to know what's happening. If this threat is as significant as it appears, we'll need every ally we can muster. The Horde? Gen's eyes flashed yellow, his Worgen nature fully surfacing, claws extending unconsciously. You'd trust those savages with this information? Give them intelligence about Alliance vulnerabilities? I'd trust that they'll face the same threat we do. Anduin replied firmly, his voice carrying royal authority that brooked no argument. If this Omni-Man is as dangerous as we suspect, if the Viltrum Empire he represents possesses forces beyond our current understanding, we'll need every ally we can muster. Personal grudges, factional disputes, historical grievances, none of these have any place in the face of existential threats. The Legion taught us that lesson at tremendous cost. I won't ignore it now. Within minutes, magical energies swirled in the throne room as Jaina began casting a teleportation spell. Arcane symbols forming in the air with precise geometries. Anduin stood in the casting circle, Charlemagne belted at his side, his ceremonial armor gleaming in the afternoon light that streamed through the throne room's high windows. Beside him, Jaina's hands wove patterns of power that would transport them across miles in an instant, while Velen stood serene and ready, his staff glowing with soft radiance. "Your Majesty," Gen said quietly, approaching before the spell completed. "If this goes poorly, if this entity proves hostile, Stormwind will need leadership. You're risking more than just yourself." "I know," Anduin replied, meeting the older king's worried gaze. "But my father taught me that kings who ask others to face dangers they won't face themselves don't deserve crowns. If there's a chance for peaceful resolution, I have to take it. And if there's not, then I need to understand what we're facing firsthand." The spell completed and reality folded. When it unfolded moments later, Anduin stood in Goldshire's town square, flanked by Jaina and Velen. Around them, terrified citizens huddled in doorways, watching the strange visitor who stood at the center of the square like a statue, observing everything with that same clinical detachment Sentinel Stromwine had described. Omni-Man turned as they materialized, his gaze sweeping across the king with analytical precision, measuring, calculating, determining threat levels and significance with practiced efficiency. "You lead these people," he stated, not a question but an observation backed by certainty. "I can see it in how they look at you, in the deference they show despite their fear. Good. That will make this conversation more efficient." Delegation of authority suggests organizational sophistication, which increases this world's potential value. "I am King Anduin Rin of Stormwind," Anduin announced, his voice carrying across the square with more confidence than he felt, projecting authority through carefully controlled tone and posture. "You've entered Alliance territory without permission, destroyed Alliance property, and threatened Alliance citizens through demonstrations of force. I'm here to ask you, peacefully and respectfully, to explain your purpose and your origin, to help us understand why you're here and what you want from Azeroth." Direct and courteous, Omni-Man observed, a hint of approval entering his tone. "I appreciate efficiency. Very well, King Anduin Rin. I am Nolan Grayson, emissary and scout for the Viltrum Empire. We are a civilization that spans multiple galaxies, a power that has existed for thousands of years by your reckoning, dedicated to strengthening and elevating promising species across existence. I was dispatched to this reality, to this dimension you call home, to assess whether Azeroth and its inhabitants warrant induction into our empire as valued members, or whether you require more forceful integration." "Induction implies consent," Jaina interjected, frost beginning to form in the air around her as her emotional state manifested in unconscious magical discharge. "What happens if we refuse your empire's offer?" Omni-Man's gaze shifted to the Archmage, and for the first time, genuine interest flickered in his expression, replacing clinical assessment with scholarly curiosity. "You manipulate thermal energy at the molecular level," he said, studying the frost with fascination usually reserved for complex mechanisms or beautiful art. "Through some form of mental projection or bioenergy manipulation. Remarkable. Your species has developed paranormal abilities alongside technology and civilization that significantly increases your value to the Empire. Such abilities could be cultivated, enhanced, spread throughout your population with proper guidance." He returned his attention to Anduin, the moment of scientific curiosity passing back into professional assessment. "As for refusal, that is certainly your right as a sentient being with free will. The Viltrum Empire does not typically force immediate subjugation except in cases where species present active threats to our interests or to their own survival. However, I would encourage you to carefully consider the benefits of willing cooperation versus the costs of resistance. The Viltrum Empire offers protection from external threats, technological advancement that could revolutionize your civilization, and guidance toward optimal societal development based on millennia of experience governing countless worlds. In exchange, We ask only for loyalty to the Empire and contribution to the greater whole." "We've heard such offers before," Velen said quietly, his voice heavy with millennia of experience, with memories of fallen civilizations and empty promises. The Burning Legion promised order through annihilation of free will, unity through corruption. The Void whispers of perfect harmony through submission to madness. Every conquering force in history has dressed domination in promises of enlightenment. What makes your empire different from every other power that has threatened our world? For the first time, something like respect crossed Omni-Man's features, a subtle shift in expression that suggested he recognized wisdom when he encountered it. "You have lived long enough to develop skepticism. Good. That shows your species can learn from experience. Tell me about these enemies you've faced. The Burning Legion, the Void that whispers. What manner of adversaries have tested your civilization? What threats have you survived? This information will help me assess Azeroth's resilience and potential." Anduin exchanged glances with his advisors, a silent conversation passing between them. Revealing Azeroth's history might be dangerous, exposing vulnerabilities and past weaknesses, but concealing it could be equally risky, suggesting dishonesty that might poison any potential for peaceful resolution. "Azeroth has endured," he said carefully, choosing words with diplomatic precision. "Invasions by the Burning Legion, an army of demons commanded by the fallen Titan Sargeras, seeking to unmake reality itself and return all existence to primal chaos. Corruption from old gods imprisoned deep within our world's core, ancient entities of pure malevolence that whisper madness and seek to transform all life into tools for their unknowable purposes. Dragons driven mad by power and rage, forces of nature that can reshape continents. The undead scourge led by the Lich King, necromantic plague that nearly consumed all life on the planet. Deathwing, the aspect of Earth, who sought to shatter the world into fragments. We've survived not through submission to greater powers, but through unity, through sacrifice, and through the strength of our bonds with each other and with the light that sustains us." "The light," Omni-Man repeated, his focus sharpening, studying Anduin with renewed interest. "That energy signature I sense emanating from you and your companions, particularly from the elderly one. Another form of your species' paranormal abilities, or something different. The energy feels almost structured, purposeful, as though it originates from a source rather than generating within you. The light is the fundamental force of creation itself," Velen explained, his voice taking on the reverent tone he used when discussing his faith. "Life, hope, compassion given form and power. Those who wield it do so not through innate ability alone, but through faith and connection to something greater than themselves, to the cosmic force that binds all life together and opposes the Void's entropy." "Faith," Omni-Man said, and his tone carried a note of dismissal, the skepticism of someone who had seen countless religions across countless worlds. "Superstition given structure and ritual. But the effects are measurable and reproducible, which suggests an underlying mechanism you've simply attributed to divine intervention rather than understanding the actual principles involved. Fascinating. Your civilization has clearly advanced in unconventional directions, developing abilities through belief rather than through genetic engineering or technological augmentation. That makes Azeroth unusual, possibly unique." "We are not primitive," Anduin said, his voice hardening, pride in his civilization overriding diplomatic caution. "And we are not seeking elevation from outsiders who know nothing of our history, our struggles, our achievements. Azeroth stands on its own strength, through our own choices and sacrifices. If your empire seeks peaceful relations, cultural exchange, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, then we can discuss such arrangements through proper diplomatic channels with time for consideration and negotiation. But if you come as conquerors wearing the mask of benefactors, you will find Azeroth far more resilient than you imagine. We have stood against demons and gods. We will stand against your empire if necessary." Omni-Man studied the young king for a long moment, and something in his expression suggested calculation, reassessment of initial assumptions. Spoken with the courage of one who has never truly known defeat, who has always found victory snatched from the jaws of destruction through heroic intervention or fortunate circumstance. Admirable, but dangerous. Such confidence can lead to catastrophic miscalculation. He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Very well, King Anduin. I will conduct the remainder of my assessment through observation rather than further demonstrations of force. But understand this clearly. The Viltrum Empire will make its determination about Azeroth with or without your cooperation. The only question is whether you choose to participate in shaping that determination or whether you leave it entirely in my hands." He rose into the air, hovering above the square, his cape rippling in wind that seemed to follow him. "I suggest you prepare your people for change. The old order of your world, this isolation from the greater cosmos, is ending. What replaces it depends on the choices you make in the coming days and the strength you demonstrate. Choose wisely." With that declaration, he shot into the sky, the sonic boom of his departure shattering every window in Goldshire and leaving the Alliance leadership staring at the space he'd occupied moments before. "He's going to attack," Gen said into the stunned silence, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This is the calm before the storm, the predator circling before the kill. We need to mobilize everything, call in every favor, activate every defense." "No," Anduin said slowly, his mind racing through tactical considerations and diplomatic possibilities. "He's assessing us, trying to understand our capabilities, our culture, our weaknesses before making his recommendation to this Viltrum Empire. Which means we have time. Not much, but some. And we need to use it wisely. Jaina, I need you to reach out to every mage in the Kirin Tor, every magical expert across the Alliance. If this Omni-Man operates outside our understanding of physics and magic, then we need to think beyond conventional combat strategies. Find ways to counter abilities that shouldn't exist. Velen, consult with the Nearu if you can reach them through the light. We need every advantage, every insight, every scrap of knowledge we can gather about beings from beyond our reality. And you, Your Majesty?" Velen asked, his ancient eyes studying the young king with concern and approval mixed in equal measure. Anduin's hand tightened on Charlemagne, feeling the sword's power resonate through the hilt. "I'm going to do what my father would have done. I'm going to seek counsel from someone who has more experience dealing with impossible threats than anyone alive. I'm going to Icecrown. The Lich King may have insights about entities that exist outside normal reality. The journey to Icecrown was accomplished through portal magic, Jaina's mastery of teleportation allowing instant transit across continents. The Frozen Throne stood as it always had, a monument to past sins and present vigilance, a reminder that some threats required eternal watchfulness. The Citadel loomed against the perpetually dark sky, ice and bone fused into architecture that spoke of death and power in equal measure. Anduin materialized through the portal at the base of the Citadel, his breath misting in the supernatural cold that permeated this place even through his armor's protections. The Scourge was contained now, its endless hunger chained by the will of one who sat the Frozen Throne in eternal torment. No longer the apocalyptic threat it had been during the Third War, but the memory of that dark time lingered in every frozen stone, in every whisper of wind through icy corridors. At the summit of the Citadel, past countless stairs carved from frozen death itself, the Lich King waited. Bolvar Fordragon, former paladin and defender of the Alliance, current jailer of the damned, sat upon the throne of ice and bone with flames wreathing his body. The helm of domination rested upon his head, a crown of dark power that bound him to this eternal duty, connecting his consciousness to every undead creature that fell under the Scourge's dominion. Anduin Wrynn, Bolvar's voice echoed across the frozen wastes, each word carrying the weight of countless souls, the chorus of death-given voice through one tortured man. You come seeking counsel about the intruder. I have felt his presence since he entered this world, sensed his arrival like a discordant note in the song of death that surrounds me, an anomaly, foreign, fundamentally different from everything else that exists on Azeroth. Anduin climbed the stairs slowly, each step measured, showing respect for the sacrifice Bolvar had made when he took up the helm to prevent the scourge from running rampant. You've observed him then? Through the eyes of your undead servants? I have observed him through the eyes of the dead, Bolvar corrected, his voice resonating with power that transcended mere sound. Every soul that has perished on Azeroth maintains a connection to me through the helm of domination. Through them, I perceive events across the world, understand through their scattered perspectives. This Omni-Man troubles me in ways I cannot fully articulate. He is alive, powerfully so, his life force burning brighter than almost any being I have sensed. Yet there is something about him that resonates with finality, with ending. He is not death, but he is closely acquainted with it, comfortable with it in ways that suggest long experience. Can we stop him? Anduin asked directly, cutting through philosophical observations to reach practical considerations. Can the combined forces of the Alliance and Horde defeat him if he turns hostile, if diplomacy fails and war becomes inevitable? Bolvar was silent for a long moment, the flames that wreathed his form flickering with his contemplation, shadows dancing across ice that would never melt. I have commanded armies in defense of Azeroth. I stood at the Wrathgate and survived what should have killed me. I have witnessed the power of the Lich King from both sides, as enemy and as bearer of the crown. I have felt the strength of the Scourge when it marched with unified purpose. This being, this Viltrum, is different from all of that. He is not magical in nature, which means our conventional countermeasures will be largely ineffective. He possesses physical capabilities that exceed anything in my experience, which includes witnessing dragons, demons, and the most powerful mortals Azeroth has produced. That's not an answer, Anduin pressed, needing clarity even if the truth was harsh. Then here is your answer, Bolvar replied, his burning eyes fixing on the young king with intensity that made even Anduin's light-blessed soul feel cold. Can we stop him? Perhaps, but the price would be catastrophic. Can we survive the attempt if we fail? That is far less certain. If you choose to stand against this entity, you must be prepared to sacrifice everything. Not just armies or cities, not just heroes or legends, but potentially the world itself. Victory against beings of such power often requires measures as terrible as the threat itself. Sometimes the price of victory is too high to pay without destroying what you're trying to save. And the alternative? Submit to his empire? Allow Azeroth to be absorbed into some cosmic conquest, losing our independence, our right to determine our own future? That is a choice only you and the other leaders can make, young king. But I will tell you this, I sense others like him. Not here, not yet, but waiting somewhere beyond the veil between realities. He is the vanguard, the scouts sent ahead. If Azeroth impresses him sufficiently, more will come as partners seeking cooperation. If we destroy him, more will come as conquerors seeking vengeance. If we prove too weak to matter, they may ignore us entirely or eliminate us as irrelevant obstacles. The only question is whether they arrive as allies, enemies, or exterminators. Anduin descended from Icecrown with more questions than answers, but with one certainty crystallized in his mind. Whatever happened next, Azeroth needed to present a united front, needed to show strength through cooperation rather than division through ancient enmities, which meant the conversation he'd been dreading could no longer be delayed. It was time to speak with the Horde, to reach across factional boundaries and seek alliance against a threat that made their historical conflict seem petty and meaningless. Orgrimmar sweltered under the Durotar sun, the city of iron and blood, standing defiant against the harsh wasteland that surrounded it, a testament to orcish determination and resilience. The valley that housed the great city was naturally defensible, surrounded by red stone cliffs that provided both protection and intimidation. Anduin's arrival through a portal directly into the Valley of Wisdom drew immediate attention from Korkron guards, elite warriors who leveled weapons with practiced efficiency before recognizing the banner of peace he carried. White cloth emblazoned with both alliance and horde symbols, the traditional sign of diplomatic approach. Within the hour, he stood in Gramash Hold, the heart of horde leadership, before the leaders of a faction that had been ally and enemy in equal measure throughout Azeroth's recent history. Warchief Thrall, the green-skinned orc shaman who had proven that honor could exist even in hearts the Alliance once considered monstrous, sat in the place of leadership, his armor bearing marks of countless battles. Bane Bloodhoof, High Chieftain of the Tauren, towered over the assembly with gentle wisdom in his eyes that belied his massive frame. Lorthamar Theron, Regent of the Blood Elves, stood in crimson armor that gleamed even in the Hold's dim lighting. Thalishra, first Arcanist of Suramar and leader of the Nightborn, her Night Elf heritage evident despite the arcane corruption that made her people distinct from their cousins. King Rin, Thrall greeted him, his voice carrying the rumble of thunder, power constrained but always present beneath the surface. Your message spoke of an urgent threat to Azeroth itself, something that transcends faction and requires immediate cooperation. The Horde listens with open ears and minds, setting aside past conflicts for the duration of this council. Anduin wasted no time on diplomatic pleasantries or careful dancing around difficult topics. He recounted everything: Omni-Man's arrival through a rift in reality, his demonstrated power that casually destroyed fortifications, his claims about the Viltrum Empire spanning galaxies, the assessment he was conducting to determine Azeroth's fate. As he spoke, he watched reactions ripple through the assembled Horde leaders. Skepticism from some, concern from others, but significantly no dismissal. The Horde had learned through blood and sacrifice that threats to Azeroth came in countless forms. So this Omni-Man is scouting us for potential conquest. Bane rumbled when Anduin finished, his deep voice resonating through the Hold. Determining if we're worth the effort of subjugation, analyzing our strengths and weaknesses like a hunter studying prey before the strike. Such arrogance offends honor, but it's dangerous arrogance if his power matches your description. We cannot afford to dismiss this threat simply because it insults our pride. My mages have analyzed the energy signatures from his arrival point. Thalishra added, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that created shimmering displays of arcane data, complex equations, and force measurements floating in magical projection. This is not portal magic as we understand it. Not a tear between Azeroth and the Emerald Dream. Not a rift to the Shadowlands or the Twisting Nether. He came from somewhere else entirely, somewhere outside the cosmological framework we've mapped. Another reality, perhaps, or a dimension that exists parallel to our own, but normally remains inaccessible. Can you send him back? Lorthamar asked practically, his tactical mind immediately seeking solutions. If he came through a rift, can we force him back through it, seal it behind him, prevent others from following? Thalishra shook her head, frustration evident in the gesture. The rift collapsed completely after his passage, sealing itself as though it had never existed. Recreating it would require understanding we don't possess, and likely never will without studying the technology or magic that created it initially. At least, not with current Nightborn knowledge alone. Perhaps if we consulted with the Eternal Palace's ancient records from the time before the Sundering when Ashara's empire commanded powers we've since lost. Or perhaps the Titan's research facilities scattered across the world might contain relevant information. But such research would take months or years, not days. So we can't banish him easily, Thrall said slowly, processing this limitation. And conventional warfare seems ineffective based on what King Rin described. That leaves 3 realistic options. Diplomacy, attempting to convince him that conquest is neither necessary nor beneficial. Adaptation, finding ways to counter his abilities through methods we haven't yet explored. Or annihilation, discovering some weapon or combination of forces powerful enough to eliminate him as a threat before his empire can respond to his reports. Diplomacy with a conqueror? One of the orc commanders scoffed, a veteran whose scarred face spoke of countless battles. That's the path of weakness, of submission dressed in pretty words. Better to die fighting than to live kneeling. No, Thrall corrected firmly, his voice carrying authority that silenced further protest. That's the path of wisdom, of intelligence that recognizes strength comes in many forms. Strength is not measured solely in how quickly we rush to battle, how eager we are to spill blood. True strength includes the judgment to recognize when fighting is necessary and when seeking alternatives serves our interests better. If this Viltrum Empire is as vast as Omni-Man claims, if they command resources and power spanning galaxies, then we need to understand what we're facing before we commit to war that might be unwinnable. Agreed completely, Anduin said, grateful for Thrall's support, for the maturity that had replaced the Horde's earlier bloodthirsty reputation. But we also need to prepare for the worst possible outcome. If diplomacy fails, if Omni-Man decides Azeroth requires forceful integration rather than willing partnership, we need to be ready with every weapon, every strategy, every advantage we can muster. Which is why I'm here proposing something unprecedented: Alliance Horde Unified Response. Cooperation on a scale we've rarely achieved outside of world-ending threats like the Burning Legion. You're proposing permanent alliance, Bane observed, his wise eyes studying Anduin carefully. Not temporary cooperation that dissolves when the immediate threat passes, but genuine integration of our defensive capabilities and strategic planning. That's a significant request given our history, given Teldrassil and Theramore, and all the blood spilled between our factions. This may be a world-ending threat, Anduin replied honestly, meeting Bane's gaze without flinching. Or it may be an opportunity for Azeroth to join something larger, to take our place among cosmic civilizations if we can prove ourselves worthy. But either way, we face it together or not at all. Division makes us vulnerable, makes us weak in ways that Omni-Man will certainly report to his empire. Unity makes us strong, makes us formidable even against impossible odds. Thrall extended his hand across the war table, and Anduin took it without hesitation, feeling the orc's calloused palm against his own, the grip firm and honest. Around them, the assembled leaders of the Horde nodded their agreement, some more reluctantly than others, but all recognizing necessity when it was presented clearly. Old grudges, recent conflicts, personal animosities, all were set aside in the face of this new unknown, this threat that cared nothing for faction or history. Then let us prepare together, Thrall declared, his voice carrying ceremonial weight. The Horde and Alliance stand as one against this Omni-Man and whatever power he represents. Let him report to his empire that Azeroth is unified, that we face external threats with combined strength. And may the elements grant us the wisdom to choose the right path forward, whether that leads to partnership or to war. Omni-Man had been on Azeroth for 3 days, and his assessment grew more complicated with each passing hour. Each new discovery adding layers of complexity to what should have been a straightforward evaluation. He stood atop Mount Hyjal, the sacred mountain of the Night Elves, surveying Nordrassil, the world tree that violated every principle of biology and physics he understood. A tree the size of a mountain, its trunk wider than some cities, its branches supporting their own ecosystems. More impossibly, it radiated energy that his Viltrum senses could detect, life force in something else. Something that sustained the immortality of an entire race through mechanisms that defied rational explanation. Fascinating, deeply troubling, potentially invaluable if properly understood and replicated. The Viltrum Empire had encountered biological engineering on countless worlds, seen civilizations manipulate genetics to create everything from enhanced warriors to living starships. But this was different. This wasn't manipulation of existing biology, but something that touched on fundamental principles of existence itself. Life and death made negotiable through connection to a cosmic tree that shouldn't exist. He had explored 6 continents over the past 3 days, moving at speeds that allowed him to cover vast distances, examining dozens of cities and hundreds of smaller settlements. The diversity was staggering. Humans, orcs, elves of multiple varieties with distinct cultures and appearances, dwarves living in mountain fortresses, gnomes obsessed with mechanical innovation, Tauren who resembled mythological creatures from primitive cultures, Draenei whose technology blended the organic and mechanical in ways he found aesthetically pleasing in others. A menagerie of sentient life living in precarious balance between cooperation and conflict, united by their world but divided by history and temperament. The technology level frustrated him with its inconsistency. Some settlements operated at what Viltrum scouts would categorize as medieval level, feudal societies dependent on agriculture and basic metalworking. Others employed mechanical engineering that, while crude by Viltrum standards, showed innovative thinking and problem-solving that suggested significant potential. The gnomish city of Gnomerigan, even in its current state of radiation contamination, contained devices and mechanisms that demonstrated understanding of advanced principles, energy manipulation, dimensional compression, artificial intelligence in primitive form. But it was the magic that truly complicated his assessment beyond simple categorization. Omni-Man had encountered countless civilizations across multiple galaxies that mistook advanced technology for magic, that attributed natural phenomena to supernatural sources out of ignorance or superstition. But Azeroth's magic was genuine, unmistakable in its defiance of physical laws. Individuals who could manipulate matter at the molecular level through thought alone. Warriors who called down lightning from clear skies without technological assistance. Druids who transformed their physical bodies into entirely different species. Priests whose healing abilities operated through faith rather than medical knowledge or biotechnology. It was impossible, which meant either his understanding of what was possible required fundamental revision, or this universe operated on different principles than the realities the Viltrum Empire normally encountered. Either possibility warranted serious consideration and significantly increased Azeroth's value to the Empire. He had tested himself against several magic users over the past days, brief confrontations designed to probe capabilities without causing serious casualties. A night elf druid who had transformed into a massive bear, exhibiting strength that, while inferior to his own Viltrum power, far exceeded what their base form should have allowed based on mass and muscle density. The transformation itself defied conservation of mass, suggesting either matter generation or dimensional shunting of excess tissue during the change. A human mage who had frozen an entire lake solid in seconds, manipulating thermal energy on a scale that should have required industrial equipment or sophisticated technology. A Tauren shaman who had called lightning from a clear sky, commanding atmospheric electricity through what appeared to be simple prayer and gesture. None had hurt him significantly. His Viltrum physiology provided resistance to temperature extremes, electrical discharge, and physical trauma that made most attacks ineffective. But several had surprised him with creativity, with tactical thinking that exploited environmental factors and coordinated assault patterns. That alone was noteworthy, worth including in his report. The Viltrum Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds across thousands of years. On most of them, Omni-Man represented an insurmountable force, something so far beyond local capabilities that resistance was brief and futile. Here, on Azeroth, he sensed he could be challenged. Not defeated easily, but challenged in ways that required genuine effort. The question forming in his mind as he surveyed this impossible world tree was whether that made Azeroth more or less valuable to the Empire. More valuable because challenging opponents could test Viltrum youths, could provide training environments for the next generation. Less valuable because challenging meant potential casualties, meant conquest would be costly in ways that most acquisitions were not. His contemplation was interrupted by a presence approaching from the east, detected by his enhanced senses long before it became visible to normal perception. Omni-Man turned, his analytical mind already assessing the newcomer. Elderly by human standards, Draenei rather than human, radiating power on levels he had not encountered elsewhere on Azeroth. Not physical power like the Celestials he would face later, but something more subtle, more fundamental. This being was connected to something larger, drawing strength from sources beyond himself. The prophet Velen landed on the mountain peak, his hover crystal lowering him gently to the stone surface, tentacles swaying with the motion. Up close, in direct observation, Omni-Man could see the wisdom etched into every line of the prophet's face, could sense the weight of millennia carried with dignity and grace. This was a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, who had seen empires conquer and crumble, who possessed perspective that transcended immediate circumstances. Omni-Man, Velen greeted him, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested careful thought and genuine interest rather than fear or hostility. I hoped we might speak privately, away from the eyes of armies and the pressure of political considerations. Just two beings seeking to understand each other beyond the roles we've been assigned. Understanding is efficient, Omni-Man acknowledged, curiosity overriding his normal preference for solitude during assessment periods. It reduces conflict born from miscommunication and helps identify optimal paths forward. Very well, Prophet. What do you wish to discuss that requires privacy? Your purpose, Velen said simply, moving to sit on a stone outcropping that overlooked the forested valleys below. Your true purpose, not the rhetoric about elevation and guidance that you've shared with political leaders. I have lived for 25,000 years, Nolan Grayson of Viltrum. I have seen conquerors before, watched them justify their actions with philosophies that made domination seem noble. They all believe they act for the greater good, that their violence is necessary for some higher purpose. What makes you different? What makes your empire's conquest less destructive than the Burning Legion's annihilation or the Old God's corruption? Omni-Man studied the ancient being before him, noting the sincere curiosity rather than accusation in the question. You're telepathic. You could have attempted to read my mind if you wished, tried to extract the truth directly. Why ask instead? Because some truths must be spoken to have meaning, Velen replied, his gaze distant as though seeing beyond immediate reality into possibility and probability. I could perceive your surface thoughts, sense emotional currents beneath your words. But I choose to hear your conscious answer, the truth you consciously acknowledge rather than the hidden thoughts you might not fully recognize yourself. There is power in that distinction, in the choice to communicate rather than to invade. A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind that whispered through Nordrassil's branches, carrying the scent of ancient growth and life sustained through cosmic power. When Omni-Man spoke, his voice carried weight it had not held before, genuine consideration rather than rehearsed explanation. The Viltrum Empire operates on a principle that we consider self-evident through observation of countless civilizations. The strong survive and guide the weak towards strength, preventing them from destroying themselves through inefficiency, conflict, and short-sighted leadership. We have watched species develop advanced technology only to annihilate themselves in nuclear fire. We have seen civilizations achieve greatness only to collapse into barbarism through cultural decay. We have witnessed potential wasted, brilliance squandered, futures destroyed by beings too short-lived or too narrow-minded to see beyond immediate gratification. We offer an alternative. Submit to Viltrum guidance, accept our experience and wisdom accumulated over millennia, and you receive the benefit of our protection our knowledge, our strength. Refuse, and you continue down the path of self-destruction until some other threat eliminates you or you eliminate yourselves. We do not conquer for resources alone, though we claim those. We do not dominate for sadistic pleasure. We conquer because it is necessary, because weak civilizations become threats to themselves and others. And if we wish to forge our own path? Velen asked, his voice gentle but carrying challenge beneath courtesy. If we choose neither submission nor self-destruction but something else entirely, learning from our mistakes while maintaining our independence and free will? Then you are remarkable exceptions, Omni-Man admitted. But remarkability does not equal sustainability. I have studied your history during my assessment, accessed your records, interviewed your historians and scholars. The wars between Alliance and Horde that have claimed millions. The betrayals that tore apart empires. The near extinctions from demons, from undead, from corrupted dragons. Azeroth has survived not through wisdom, but through fortunate intervention. Through heroes who rise at critical moments. Through ancient powers that intercede when all seems lost. That is not a stable foundation for civilization. That is gambling, betting that the right hero will appear at the right moment for all eternity. Eventually, inevitably, you will lose that gamble. Velen nodded slowly, acknowledging the logic while rejecting its conclusion. Perhaps you are correct that our foundation appears unstable from external observation. But I would argue that a civilization built on heroes, on sacrifice, on the conscious choice to stand against darkness, even when victory seems impossible, that foundation is stronger than one built on submission to superior force. We may stumble and fall, we may face defeats that nearly destroy us, but we rise again, stronger for the challenge, wiser for the experience. Can you say the same for species that have never known defeat because the Viltrum Empire conquered them before they could be tested? Have they truly grown stronger, or have they simply become extensions of Viltrum will, puppets that move at your command? The question hung in the air, and Omni-Man found himself without immediate answer, his certainty eroded by perspective he had not considered. The Viltrum Empire had indeed never known defeat, had conquered every species they encountered with overwhelming force. But was that strength or merely unchallenged power? There was a difference, one he'd never been forced to contemplate before this moment. You're trying to plant doubt, he said finally, recognizing the tactic. Attempting to change my assessment through philosophical argument rather than demonstration of capability. It won't work. I have a duty to my empire, a responsibility to provide honest evaluation based on objective criteria. That duty requires me to set aside sentiment and focus on measurable factors. I know, Velen said softly, no disappointment in his voice, only understanding and acceptance. But I hoped to plant a seed nonetheless, something that might grow in time. Because I have seen your future, Nolan Grayson of Viltrum. Not the certain path you will walk, for the future is not fixed, but the possible paths spreading before you in probability and potential. In some timelines, you destroy this world and move on to your next conquest, another victory in a long history of victories. In others, you find something here that changes you fundamentally, that challenges your understanding of strength and civilization in ways that reshape your entire perspective. The question is which future you choose to create through the decisions you make in these critical days. With that cryptic statement, Velen stood and departed, his hover crystal carrying him back toward the portal network that would return him to Stormwind. Omni-Man remained on Mount Highjow, alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that Azeroth might be more complex, more philosophically challenging than any world the Viltrum Empire had encountered in its long history.